I know this morning when you got up, you said, you know what I really want to hear this morning? I want to hear a presentation by a banker. Right? Or, I really want to hear an economist, as the first speaker of the day. But what I'm going to try and do in about 30 minutes is I'm going to give you a whirlwind overview of the state of literacy in America. Now, to be honest, my speciality, my focus has been on Canadian literacy, because TD Bank is the second largest bank in Canada. It's the 8th largest bank in the United States. And the bank has been a big champion of literacy for quite a long period of time. And what effectively happened was about 7 years ago, the bank came to me and said, can you come and do a research report on the state of literacy? Like, we're giving a lot of money to charitable causes that are trying to promote literacy. But can you do some objective analysis about what the state of literacy looks like? And I gotta be honest, I couldn't imagine we actually had a problem. We have a caring, inclusive society. We have a well-developed primary, secondary, and post-secondary education system. How could we possibly have something, have a problem on something so foundational as literacy, numeracy, and essential skills? So you can imagine my shock when I discovered that in Canada, 5 in 10 Canadian adults don't have the desired level of literacy to succeed in a modern knowledge-based economy. 50%. So I was stunned, right? And I tried to understand why, how this could be, right? Because I think there's an awareness problem that people don't realize the challenge that we have on the literacy front. And I think this is where my public speaking actually tends to have a bit of an influence, because when advocates in the literacy space get up and say, hey, we need to invest more in literacy, the public will say, yeah, well, what else do you expect a literacy group to be saying? So it actually becomes much more impactful when you can get people outside of the literacy movement to actually say, hey, no, this is something we really need to understand, and that this is something really that needs to be addressed. When we think about the challenge, I tried to understand why, how this could possibly be. I think part of the awareness problem is the fact that people that have strong literacy skills take them for granted. They fundamentally do not appreciate what the world would be like if they didn't have those skills. At the same time, people tend to think of literacy and numeracy as a binary outcome. You either have it or you don't. Right? You're either literate, and I noticed in the materials for this conference that you actually make references to the word illiteracy. We don't in Canada. If you use illiteracy actually in a statement, it's actually highly politically incorrect, and the literacy movement in Canada will come after you with knives. And I didn't realize that. So let me tell you, the first couple of times I was doing presentations in this space, I got attacked because you don't use that language when you're talking about it. But people tend to think of it as a binary outcome, when in fact we know it's a skill, right? It's like playing the piano. There's people that can't play at all. There's people that can play a few notes. There's people that can play a song. There's people who are masters. And you know what? Literacy, numeracy is the same, right? It's a spectrum of proficiency. It's not a binary outcome. And that means you can have a situation where people have the basics, but they're still not at the level that you need them to be to really succeed. So first of all, people take it for granted if they have the skills. Secondly, there's an awareness problem about not understanding that it's not a binary outcome, and we're not just talking about people that can't read at all. And then there's the challenge that some people have weak literacy skills, but they don't actually realize they have them, right? They don't realize that they're below the desired level and that it's actually holding them back, it's restricting their opportunities. I got in so much trouble when I was doing a television interview once, and I was talking about this issue, and I said, hey, look, I have family members that wouldn't actually meet the desired level of literacy. And you know what happened, right? I got off stage, and the minute I was out of this television studio, the very first phone call is from my mother-in-law, who says, who? Right? So, and that tells you something about also when you have conversations about this issue, you actually need to find the right language to talk to people about how they can develop and how if they improve in this area, they can actually unlock a lot more potential and more opportunities. So this is a real challenging issue. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about some data that's out of the international benchmark surveys on adult literacy. It's called PIAC. And many of you probably are actually familiar with this data. So forgive me if I'm telling you something you already know. But I'm going to, maybe what you'll take out of the presentation is a way of like how I communicate it, help you communicate it in a different way. And I'm going to talk about literacy. I'm going to talk about numeracy. But I'm also going to make some references to problem solving in technically rich environments, which is basically a form of digital literacy, right? Capability. And you don't really want me to hear, you really don't want to hear a whole presentation on the state of literacy in Canada, right? So what I did was, actually the funny thing was when I was invited to come and speak, I just assumed that the conference would want me to put together the US numbers. And they said, well, we were expecting you to come and talk about your Canadian research. And I'm like, why would the audience care? So, if we look at the state of literacy in America, the numbers, are very similar to Canada in many respects. In fact, I'd argue the literacy challenge is a little more pronounced in America than in Canada. But at the highest level, more than 5 in 10 American adults don't have the desired level of literacy to succeed in a modern knowledge-based economy. More than 6 in 10 don't have the desired level of numeracy. When we look at the breakdown, the way they do these stats is they sort of have a ranking from 0 to 5. And level 3 correlates to better, significantly better outcomes. And so I use the word desired, right, rather than using the numbers. But if you actually break it down by component, what you can see is that about 2 in 10 American adults are at level 1 or below. And these would be the people that most of the public would think are having a literacy problem. But then there's about 3 in 10 that don't actually have the desired level of literacy. They're at level 2, but they aren't quite where we want them to be to really succeed in the labor market. And these are people that are losing opportunities. If we think of it internationally, we compare America to the OECD nations. So the OECD is 34 of the most advanced countries. America actually has numbers a little below average on literacy, but statistically lower numbers on numeracy. And in terms of problem solving with technology, so I'm going to call it digital literacy going forward because it's just easier. Digital literacy is also a little below average. And one of the things I'm really discouraged by is the fact that there actually isn't any signs of improvement. Over the last 15 years, there actually hasn't been any significant trend towards an improvement, despite the fact that we're having more educational attainment. If you actually look at graduate rates from colleges and university, they're going up. But the fundamental skills, the basic skills, aren't showing the improvement. And numeracy skills are actually going the wrong way. Numeracy is actually retreating. And so, these numbers are going to depress the hell out of you. Because when you look at numeracy and you look at where America stacks up relative to other countries, right, across the OECD, it's in third last position, right? And digital literacy, even though we think about America as being a highly innovative, incredibly productive economy, like one of the most productive economies on the planet, digital literacy is, and it's also the home of Silicon Valley, and you would think that America should be outperforming on digital literacy, but it's not. And when we actually look at it in terms of international comparisons, again, you can see America in third last position. This is not actually how you win in the world economy. When we think about young people, their scores actually are better than the average. So, kids are getting more education. So if I look at young adults, so we're looking at age 16 to 24, it was 32% of overall adults were at the desired level. It's 37 for young people at level 3, and then 10% at level 4 and 5. But that still means that 4 out of 10 young adults don't have the desired level in terms of being at level 2, and then you have a group, about 14%, that actually aren't even at level 2. To me, this is an unacceptable outcome, and it's actually a lost opportunity in a significant way. If we look at it from a gender point of view, you don't see huge differences on the literacy side, although women are a little farther ahead on literacy, just a smidgen, but not statistically significant. But women are behind in terms of numeracy. And that basically is discouraging because a lot of the jobs that you have in the labor market today, increasingly need numerical skills, and yet we have many that actually aren't hitting the mark. From a racial point of view, there is a racial divide in America in a significant way. The Hispanic population particularly is a vulnerable group, but so too are newcomers. If you actually look at newcomers, immigrants, they tend to have weaker scores. Now, the one thing I want to stress to you on the newcomer immigrant story, though, is that all these numbers are about proficiency in English. And it is the case that many newcomers actually have very strong literacy skills in their mother tongue, right? So we're not saying that immigrants coming to America are not literate. What we're saying is that too many have, as a share of the population, don't have the desired level of proficiency in English. When we think about the link between literacy and education, you can see that the two are intricately woven. And I think the president of Thomas College did a wonderful job of highlighting that. But if you look at it from a statistical point of view, parents that don't go on to higher education tend to have kids that don't go on to higher education, and they also tend to have kids that have weaker literacy skills. So higher literacy skills actually do help you into the educational system. And what you can see is the higher your literacy skills, the more likely it is for you to go to complete high school. It's more likely to go on to post-secondary education. You're more likely to succeed at post-secondary education. And you're also more likely to do adult learning. Now, these slides can be very complicated at times, and they can be very hard to read, and I'm going through the material really fast. But I've given the deck to the organizers of the conference, and anybody that wants a copy of the deck can have it afterwards, so please feel free to get it. Don't get caught up on trying to understand every slide I'm putting up. Just listen to what I'm telling you, because the story is actually what you really want to know. The slides are simply supporting evidence to make the case, to demonstrate statistically that what I'm telling you is accurate. Because some of the things I'm saying is provocative, right? Americans don't realize that 5 and 10 aren't hitting the mark, right? So if you have stronger literacy skills, you are far more likely to do continuing education. You are far more likely to do adult learning. And in today's labor market, you constantly have to improve your skills. When we think about the labor market, there is a very key relationship between stronger literacy, numeracy, and digital capacity and improvement in labor outcomes, employment, and wages. And economists are always very careful around the, correlation and causation. Sometimes you can find things that are correlated, but they aren't actually linked. In actual fact, statistically, I can prove to you that it isn't just a correlation. Literacy and numeracy actually does lead to better labor market outcomes independent of the education attainment. So if we think about the higher your literacy skills, the more likely you are to be employed, the higher your employment rate's going to be, the lower the unemployment rate will be. And statistically, if you have stronger literacy skills, if you experience unemployment, you're actually going to have a significantly shorter duration of unemployment. And it's intuitive, because if you have stronger skills, you're more likely to be able to adapt to changes. When we think about literacy skills and wages, there's a positive correlation between, and it is causation, between higher literacy skills and higher wages. So employers do pay for skills. They also pay for education. And in fact, America pays the second highest premium on literacy amongst the international countries. The only country that pays more for literacy skills is the UK. The more education you get, the lower your unemployment rate is going to be, the higher your income is going to be. Right? And so ultimately, when we think about America, ultimately, what really matters to people, right? Jobs and income. Jobs and income is your standard of living. So what I'm talking about here is really fundamental to the quality of life that Americans have. There is also a premium paid for having numeracy skills, right? So the higher your numeracy skills, the better compensation you're going to get. And one of the remarkable things is America pays the highest premium of all countries for numeracy skills. If you can statistically be above average, you increase your average hourly wages by about 28%, compounded every year over your lifetime. Right? In the stock market, we would love to get a return of 5 to 7%. So how do you feel about 28%? Right? It's a good investment. In fact, the premium on wage skills, if you are statistically above average, your numeracy skills give you an increase in hourly wages of 28%, literacy 27%, and technical skills 22%. Isn't it interesting that numeracy and literacy actually beat the technical side? Right? So in other words, you would think that employers would actually have this almost reversed. But it tells you how actually foundational the literacy and numeracy is. Employers don't think about it this way, right? They don't, right? They just value, they look at the employee and they basically assess what that person's capacity is to contribute to the firm. Underneath that is your basic essential skills of literacy and numeracy. So the employer isn't thinking, oh, I'm going to pay this person more because they have stronger literacy skills. But this is the market outcome. Ultimately, employers pay. But literacy isn't just about, jobs and income. It also has a lot of knock-on effects that are hugely beneficial. So people with stronger literacy skills are more likely to be involved in the political process. They're more likely to volunteer. They're more likely to have better health outcomes. And if you look at the statistics in terms of improvement in health outcomes, they're really significant. And this is where you can actually tie literacy and numeracy to major social issues. So when I actually go around championing this cause, I don't actually go and say, I want to have a conversation with you about literacy. I basically go out and say, hey, I want to have a conversation with you about health outcomes. I want to talk to you about dealing with major social problems. So income inequality has been getting a lot of attention in recent years. And there is a huge income inequality difference that's developing. Right? Income inequality is increasing globally across all the advanced economies, and it's rising faster in America than in most other countries. And I am not being political. Every time I talk about income inequality in America, it turns into a talk about, well, you're a Democrat versus you're a Republican. I can't be a Democrat. I'm a Canadian. Right? But what I can tell you is this is an issue. Right? And economic outcomes deteriorate if you have higher income inequality. But raising literacy skills and numeracy skills leading to better labor market outcomes helps to address income inequality. It actually helps to bring it down. Now, when I think about literacy and I go out and I do presentations, if a group will call me up and say, a local chamber of commerce will call up and say, hey, could you come and do a presentation? I'd be like, sure, can I come and talk about literacy? And usually there's this big pause on the other end of the phone. And then they say, well, we were sort of hoping you were going to come and talk about the impact of falling oil prices and the strength in the US dollar and what the stock market's going to do. And it's sort of like, oh, okay, well, I'd rather do this. I'd rather talk about this. But one of the things is trying to get businesses to care, right? And it's really hard to get businesses to understand. So from a business point of view, if an employee goes in and says, listen, I need you to pay for some training so that I learn a piece of software that I'm going to use in my job. Like I need to use Excel and I don't know Excel. I need you to pay a few $100s so that I can take an Excel course. Employers will say, yeah, no problem. Right? But you go in and you tell an employer, hey, I want to go take an English course. And they do not immediately understand how that feeds through to improving the outcome for the business. So imagine I'm a business consultant. This is the way I actually start most of my business-oriented literacy presentations. Because, okay, show of hands, how many of you think we have a literacy problem in this country? Congratulations, you're the wrong audience for this presentation, right? But what I usually start off my presentations, I say, imagine I'm a business consultant, and I come to you and I have a product. And here's what my product does. If you invest in my product, I will increase your output and profitability. I will lower error rates. I will increase the ability to do on-the-job training. I will lead to a better team performance. I will improve labor relations. I'll improve the quality of work. I'll reduce time per task. I'll improve your health and safety records. And I'll give you better employee and customer retention. Are you interested in my product? Well, those are all the things that literacy does, right? Because again, and I hate to be like a broken wheel or sound like a broken record, it is foundational, right? It's the thing that you build everything else on. The other pushback I always get from businesses is they don't have money to do training, and what they're worrying about is, what if I spend all this money on this employee? What happens if I spend all this money on this unskilled employee to make them skilled and then they leave? And my usual rebuttal is, yeah, but what if they stay? right? You need to invest in your employees. And you might wonder why an economist is talking about a subject like this. But if I take the international numbers in terms of the employment rates, the income rates, and then I say, what happens arithmetically if I take people with level 1 and give them the skills of level 2, and take the people that are level 2 and give them the skills of level 3, what would the impact be on the economy? It would create 8.5 million jobs, which is basically 3.5 years worth of employment. And the research shows that a 1% improvement in literacy skills generates basically a 2.5% increase in labor productivity. It also increases output per worker by 1.5%. And what that means, what's the value of that? That's $240 billion, right? So you put it in dollars terms and you understand why we should care about this topic. It isn't just about pulling on heartstrings. This is about productivity and competitiveness. And understand that productivity has a terrible connotation. You know, people think when you talk about productivity, it means working harder or doing more with less. But in actual fact, since the end of the Second World War, 80% of all of the increase in the standard of living in America has come through higher productivity. And when you look at productivity growth and you look at the trend of productivity growth, we desperately need stronger productivity. The world economy is becoming a much more competitive and cutthroat place, right? China, India are going up the development curve incredibly fast, and if America tries to compete with China and India on the basis of labor costs, it will lose. So how do you win in this environment? And the answer is you shift the economy towards more value-added, more sophisticated products, and you got to keep doing it every year. Any business advantage, any comparative advantage you have in the business world today, you will lose within 3 to 5 years because somebody will reverse engineer what you're doing, and then you're going to be competing on price. So you ultimately have to keep moving, and this is why you're seeing big structural changes in the economy. The share of the manufacturing sector is going down, the share of services is going up, and within services, the growth in services is in high value-added, sophisticated services. And even within manufacturing, you're having a big shift from lower value-added industries to much more sophisticated, higher value-added manufacturing. And you need a labor force that's actually capable of succeeding in the new world, but also being capable of moving with the times and changing with the times. And then we have the demographic challenge of the baby boomers that are now entering retirement, and this is going to tighten up the labor force, and it's going to create scarcity for high-skilled workers. Even in today's high unemployment environment, many employers are complaining that they can't find the high-skilled workers that they need. Right? There are jobs out there for people with strong skills. The problem is we need to move the needle up in terms of the skills that the labor force has. So I've actually gone probably long, but you try to summarize this entire subject in 30 minutes. But my key points are, first of all, that investment in literacy, numeracy, and essential skills brings sustainable gains to individuals. It makes the standard of living of individuals better off, which is probably the #1 concern. But it also brings huge benefits to businesses, to the economy, to society. It even adds to the democratic process. Improving skills in these areas can actually address major socioeconomic issues. I defy you to come up with a topic that I actually can't link literacy and numeracy to in terms of helping to address it. You try, and I'll guarantee you I can come up with some linkage, right? And that's the way the literacy movement sells itself, right? Don't sell it in terms of just increasing the skills. Tell people how it'll solve the problem that they're struggling with. And I think that we need to have more business champions, right? I think we need parents to understand the value more and how they can be more involved in terms of rating, things like raising readers. And at the same time, I think we need business champions. And I think if you get more individual champions and business champions, you'll actually move the needle in terms of public policy in this space, because you'll get a greater buy-in from governments. Because I regret to say that I actually don't think governments lead. I think governments follow. And if you can get increased awareness in this issue, I think that's when you get increased investment in the public sector. And ultimately, this is about competing in the 21st century. So I'm going to stop there. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. And like I said, you can have a copy of it.